Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the latest iteration of our Diplomat webinar series. My name is Sebastian Strangio, the Southeast Asia editor at The Diplomat, and today I'm very privileged to be hosting a discussion about the state of politics in Thailand in the wake of last month's general election. The election, of course, produced a stunning result in which the Move Forward Party, the most progressive major political party in Thailand, won the most seats in the House of Representatives. Together with a strong showing of the Pheu Thai Party, which is associated with former PM Thaksin Shinawatra, the MFP's victory was a decisive public rejection of the military establishment that has ruled Thailand in various forms since the military coup of 2014, and has intervened regularly, of course, through the course of modern Thai history. Now, in most other democracies, the MFP's leader, Pita Limjaroenrat, would have long entered office as Thailand's Prime Minister, and we would be convening for a post-mortem of his first 30 days in office. Alas, that is not the case under Thailand's military-drafted constitution, in which an unelected Senate will play an important role in selecting the next Prime Minister. As things stand, it's unclear whether the eight-party coalition that the MFP has assembled will garner the necessary votes to ensure that Pita becomes the next Thai PM. In the meantime, the protracted interregnum between Election Day and the formation of a new government has created a space for all sorts of legal challenges against Pita's candidacy. Thailand's Election Commission has now finalized and confirmed the results of the May 14 poll, but says that an investigation into Pita's ownership of shares in a defunct TV broadcaster is continuing, which, based on past precedent, could be used to block him from the country's top office. So Thai politics is at a moment of great, uncertainty when the will of the people stands seemingly opposed to the conservative establishment clustered around the military and the palace. We'll be addressing a number of questions in the next hour related to the election and its aftermath. What accounted for the MFP's unexpected victory, and what does it say about the changing nature of Thai society? What explains the fear and concern of Thai conservatives about an MFP-led government? What chance is there that the MFP will emerge from this post-election stasis at the head of Thailand's next government? And what might happen if it is obstructed from doing so? And finally, even in the event that the MFP makes its way into government, what challenges would a Prime Minister Pita face in seeking to enact his party's ambitious progressive agenda, which involves direct challenges to powerful economic interests and the nearly unchallengeable power of the Thai monarchy? To ponder these and other questions, we're very privileged today to be joined by a distinguished panel of regional experts and commentators on Thai politics. The first of our panelists is Dr. Aim Sinpeng, a senior lecturer at the Department of Government and International Relations at the University of Sydney. Aim has done some fascinating research on the conservative yellow shirt movement in Thai politics, the subject of a book that came out, I think, in 2021. And she's also edited a fascinating recent volume on the role of social media in Southeast Asian politics. Pavin Chachavalpongpun is an associate professor at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Kyoto University. As many of you will probably know, he also has a close personal involvement with some of the topics that we'll be discussing today. After the 2014 coup, he went into political exile to avoid arrest by the military junta. And he has also campaigned on the highly sensitive question of the Thai monarchy, including most recently setting up the campaign 112 Watch to build momentum for the repeal of the country's lèse majesté law. Pavin is also the author of numerous books on Thai politics and foreign relations. Our final panelist is Dr. Gregory Raymond, a lecturer in the Coral Bells School of Asia-Pacific Affairs, who focuses on Southeast Asian politics and foreign relations. He's the author, most recently, of books about Thai strategic culture and the role of history and memory in the US-Thailand alliance. To begin with, I'll be inviting each of our speakers to speak for about 10 minutes about various aspects of the Thai political landscape. After that, I might pose a question or two of my own to the panel before we move on to a Q&A section to close off our hour. If you have any questions for the panelists, please enter them in the chat box, and then I'll choose a selection to read out during the question and answer period. And so without further ado, I'd like to call on Aim to kick off our proceedings. Over to you, Aim.
Thank you, everyone, for having me today. So Sebastian's asked me to discuss, what might explain Move Forward's victory, and more importantly, what might actually explain Pheu Thai's loss as the most popular political party in the past several elections. So let me first start with why I believe Move Forward Party won. And I think there's three key reasons. So the first one, and I think it's the most important one, when we think about the role of media, particularly social media, in facilitating the success of a political party and campaigning, and that is the DNA and the identity of what Move Forward Party is very clear. It stands for structural change, progressive structural change in Thailand that not just seeks for, better economic opportunity, education opportunities, and better welfare, but actually fundamentally change what Thailand is and what underpins the political system of Thailand. And that identity is driven by their long campaign of wanting to reform two most powerful but also anti-democratic institutions in the country, and that is the monarchy and the military. And I think the fact that Move Forward Party, which is a successor party to Future Forward Party, have always stood for that structural change is so fundamental in the age of digital campaigning today. Because if you as a party and organization are not easily identifiable and people can't say what is Move Forward, right? Then you're already losing the marketing campaigning. And so when I look at the data from, I look at 1,000 most influential TikTok accounts, Twitter accounts that are using the hashtag Leukdang 66, which is election in Thailand, and Facebook, it's so clear that the Move Forward Party supporters completely drown out all of their opponents online, because people understand what this party stands for, what changes they want to bring. And I think that competitive advantage, especially for digital kind of campaigning, is so crucial in at a time when nearly 90% of the population with internet access are on social media, right? Like, what your branding is, what you stand for, people understand. But also, and this is the second reason why I believe Move Forward Party won, and won across different groups, not just young people, is that because people understand what they stand for, they help to market and mobilize support for the party on their own. And that kind of grassroots support has been building up since Future Forward time. It's really just a continuation of 2008, 2019. And it, I think, really propels more supporters over to COVID period where we have street protests led by young people. So that's really, I think, the second reason why they won. And third, I think the third reason why they won and won against Pheu Thai is that Pheu Thai might represent change, but it's not a structural change. So I think if, having lived under the same nearly a decade rule of basically the political conservative that are backed by, previous coup government, basically living in an authoritarian regime for almost 10 years. I think voters wake up and decide, you know what? It's not enough to get another opposition party in power who just wants change about welfare and economic, reducing economic equality. I want actual real change where when I wake up, I feel like I'm in a new country. I feel hopeful that the change is going to be dramatic and big enough that I could be part of this change. And I think that empowering, that Move Forward Party was able to marshal that sense of empowerment in a much more substantive way than just let's change the government, but actually let's fundamentally transform the nation. So for these three key reasons, Move Forward Party being, very good at portraying what they stand for, have a very clear identity and DNA. Second, it helps to build very strong and ongoing both offline and online support for the party to then come and help the party mobilize votes. And third, that the party was able to portray this real sense of change that is a fundamental change for voters. I think people feel like this is time for Thailand to transform itself and leave the dictatorship years behind. And I think these are the three reasons why Move Forward Party won big this time.
Thanks, Aim. Yeah, it seems clear that the will of the people is in favor of some sort of, change, whether, structural or not. But the question of what happens from here is obviously of paramount importance. Greg, what do you think, what hurdles do stand between the MFP and forming the next Thai government, and how do you think things might proceed over the coming weeks?
Yeah, look, only the last 80 years of Thai history, which has had some sort of authoritarian rule for 7 out of every 10 years. It's a big obstacle to actually change the system, and I think we have to acknowledge that, right from the start. I think Pita's talked about Thailand, escaping this evil cycle, the Wongjon Ubat. And he's pointed to countries like South Korea and Indonesia that have done that. But when I try and think about this question of whether or not it can happen this time, because we've seen hopeful periods before. We saw that after, I guess, the end of the Cold War, and we saw a sort of 14-year democratic interregnum, which was ended by the 2006 coup. So, do we have better prospects this time? I find it helpful to think about a kind of interaction of 3 real forces in Thai history. First of all, there's obviously the progressive force for the people, for their voice to be heard, for Thailand to become more egalitarian, for sovereignty to be clearly given to the people. Obviously, there's also the conservative forces that are able to call on traditional sources of legitimacy to argue that it's fine for the military to take power if it's done for the right reasons. And then I think the third sort of factor that comes into Thai politics is the international environment, because I think Thailand is sensitive to currents in the external environment. So where are we with each of those 3 forces if we think about them interacting? I like to think of this as a kind of trialectic that drives Thai history forward. Well, I think if you look at, say, the Conservatives, I think they've lost some of their legitimacy since the royal transition. I think the association with the previous monarch, Rama IX, much revered, was able to allow Conservatives to do some things which I think they'll find more difficult now. It's something that you'll never hear in Thai political commentary in Thailand, because it's a subject which can't be discussed, but you'll hear allusions to it, and that is, the military can't talk about protecting an institution which is perhaps less important than it was in the era of Bhumibol. But on the other hand, I do think the Conservatives have kind of got better at sophisticated authoritarianism. They're quite good at using a lot of different levers to keep the democratic forces at bay. It's a tricky game, but one of the things obviously they've done is use the 2017 Constitution as a way of ensuring and giving them, an advantage, despite the clear victory by Move Forward. Move Forward still rely on have to work within the 2017 Constitution, which gives the Conservatives this huge advantage of the 250-seat majority. Now, using that is going to be something which lacks legitimacy, but we've seen that the Conservative forces aren't always concerned about that. If we look at where the Progressives are, I think AIM's established really strongly that we've seen a structural shift in what people want, and that is they don't want to just get more out of the system in terms of special payments for farmers or cheaper healthcare or a higher minimum wage. They actually want to see structural change, a change to the system, and the youth vote has been very strong for that. And there's 3 to 4 million young voters entering the electorate every year, and it's clear that they don't want more of the same, and that's really been captured. But then the international environment, I think this is something which is interesting, because I think if you're to look at the global trends, the democratic regression worldwide, China's strength as a partner for Thailand, which helped Thailand help the junta after the 2014 coup. In some ways, it's made it easier for authoritarian environments, authoritarian regimes to sort of defy the will of the people. And I think that's something which is concerning as to where we are now. So, yeah, I think going forward, there are a couple of different scenarios. I don't think Pita is going to be removed before the joint sitting of Parliament. But when we do get to that joint sitting of Parliament, is he going to be able to bring across 64 senators? I think we still have to be concerned that that's not going to happen. If it does not happen, what are the two scenarios that we might look at? One is that there's a minority government. That is, the senators get behind all of those conservative parties that didn't do too well, the two military proxy parties, Pita Limjaroenrat and Pheu Thai Party, the party in which Briut is a candidate, and the Democrats and Punjai Thai, and form a government. Well, that's going to be a short-lived government because it'll be a minority government. They won't have 250 seats in the lower house. So that's probably less likely. Would Pheu Thai split off and go with one of the military parties, go with those previous junta-aligned parties? That's still a possibility, but to my reading, Pheu Thai are not moving in that direction. There's no sign of them doing that. In fact, this week, it looks like they're prepared to concede the role of the speaker to move forward. So it looks like Pheu Thai see their future as sticking in a bloc, in a democratic bloc. And it's, you know, I think they are aware that if they now compromise and go with the military junta parties, they are probably signing a death sentence for themselves in the long term. They will lose relevance, they will lose popularity. So that's probably not likely. What about Pita entering power, taking power? That's possible, but then we should also realize that there is still the possibility that eventually we'll see the kind of surreptitious moves against him that brought down the Thaksin government. Now, it won't be as easy. I mean, Pita's clean. He's not a populist. He's not a plutocrat in the same way that Thaksin was. He's more willing to be accountable and transparent. But at the same time, he's already antagonizing some business people. And could some of these business people eventually lead street protests? Now, that's how the movement against Thaksin started. If we go back to 2005, it was Sonti Limtongun, who was a businessman who'd been quite supportive of Thaksin, but then changed his views and started these gatherings in Lumpini Park, which eventually gave rise to the Yellow Shirt movement. Well, I think we can't discount that kind of slow reaction and undermining of a Pita government going forward. And then that sets the stage, probably less likely for a coup, but a coup could still occur. And would the Conservative side be prepared to stare down protests? I have no doubt about that, because we saw that in 2020, that they're not intimidated by protests on their own.
Thanks, Greg. No, Pavin, I'll pass it to you now. You've been closely involved, as I mentioned, in the campaign to amend or abolish Article 112, the Lèse Majesté law, which criminalizes criticism of the royal family and the king. Perhaps you could speak a little bit about what this election says about Thais, particularly young Thais' view of the institution that must not be named.
Thank you. I'll be speaking on 3 points. In fact, I have been tasked to answer these mini questions. One is the changing view of especially young Thais toward the monarchy, and to an extent toward the draconian Lèse Majesté law. Second point would be whether the changing attitude has contributed to the victory of Move Forward Party. And the last one, whether Move Forward Party would really stick to the 112 agenda, as it progressed, in the future. Well, I mean, I tend to agree with Em and Greg in terms of why the younger generation, elected the future Move Forward Party, simply because I think they have wanted some kind of structural shift. But I like to also move away from that point a little bit to try to talk to also the changing both political and cultural landscape of Thailand, moving away from the Bhumibol era into Vajiralongkorn era as well. One point that we tend to forget is, they're quite fortunate, this young generation, to be able to escape long years of propaganda under King Bhumibol, we must say that since the king was hospitalized in 2019, I think to me that was the beginning of the decline of the royal power, right, under Bhumibol. And I mean, imagine that kids in 2009 and now 2023, basically it's more than 10 years, right? So I mean, I think that's why they had this kind of fortunate situation that they grew up during which time the issue of the monarchy had not become a kind of burden on their shoulder. So I think that's why it's also explained why they have become more brave than the previous generation. Definitely more brave than my generation. I have been talking to friends again in my same generation. Even a lot of them sort of understand the political context today. They are still very reluctant to talk about the issue of the monarchy and including Article 112. So that is one point why I mean this kind of situation explain the changing attitude of young Thais toward the issue of the monarchy and less majesty law. Second, it has to go back to what M has been doing in terms of the I would call it the revolution of social media. I mean, social media basically just open up everything for the younger generation, to look around, to compare Thailand with other countries, to find their own information, to contest, certain information offered to them by the state. And I think that has played a great role. And I mean, I know it really well because I'm on top of social media, all kind of social media platform. And, I'm trying so hard to try to catch up with what the younger generation think about politics today and linking up with their activity on social media. And I can tell you that the role of social media sort of, encourage them to ask difficult questions that in my generation, would not be able to do so because of the lack of social media. And the opening up of social media also allow them to think differently, especially now they sort of having a different set of idea when it comes to legitimacy, when it comes to political power. I think they just want a more transparent, leaders, whether it be leader, whether it would be the government, whether it would be the monarchy. They just want the monarchy to be able to show accountability. So, as I said, they look at the British monarchy, they look at the Japanese monarchy. I think they have wanted Thailand to be like that. And that's why they call upon the reform of the monarchy. I think for them, 112 will have to be reformed. And I think maybe even at this point, without any sign from the royal institution about the willingness to consider self-reform, or even the willingness to sort of communicate with the younger generation, I think it might be even a little bit too late, even if they decide to reform today. So in other words, I think in my discussion with the younger generation, they just want to go as far as abandoning Article 112. We're no longer talking about reform of 112 anymore. Second point is whether all this thing has contributed to the electoral victory of Move Forward Party. Yeah, I think it could be. Don't forget that the first protest move in 2020 in February, that was caused by the dissolution of the Future Forward Party, simply because a lot of supporters of Future Forward Party came from the younger generation, and they felt that this was unfair, to disband yet another party and the intervention of the Constitutional Court. So, I mean, we could explain, the backing coming from younger generation vis-a-vis the old Future Forward Party and the current Move Forward Party. This is the only party, as Aim and Chan Craig said, that has offered the most progressive platform. I mean, this kind of progressive policy or platform matches perfectly with the changing attitude of the younger generation. I mean, they really call for either structural change, as we emphasize, and also a kind of fundamental change. Another small point is they can't relate to the Pheu Thai Party, right? I mean, aside from Pheu Thai Party being unable to offer structural change, one thing we have to also consider that, I mean, just as these young generation did not grow up during the Bhumibol era, these people also did not grow up during the peak of Thaksin fever. So we're talking about the end of Thai Rak Thai in 2006, and we have to talk about this issue because Pheu Thai can never be, how to say, separated from Thaksin. And as we know, Thaksin helped with the campaign almost until the last minutes of the election campaign. So I mean, they didn't buy what Thaksin tried to sell, right? Especially, the inconsistent position of Thaksin. They're not sure whether Thaksin would go all the way to support their changing attitude, and also their new agenda. And I think they're also very suspect of Thaksin trying so hard to reconcile with the political elite. So that's why I think most of them decided to cast their vote for Move Forward Party. Last point, whether Move Forward Party would stick to their campaign to reform Article 112. I don't think they can abandon this sort of issue, this policy. In my opinion, I think the reform of Article 112 has more or less become an emblem of Move Forward Party. You talk about Move Forward Party, you have to talk about structural reform, and structural reform, including the reform of the army, the reform of Article 112, and the reform of the monarchy. They just simply cannot just abandoning it, for the sake of their own survival. I know that everyone know, I know younger generation know that, this would be a very difficult issue. But yet again, I don't think they can just walk away, because if they walk away, then basically they would break the promise. Yeah. But I also understand that, the Move Forward Party will have to walk very carefully from this point onward. That's why, in the MOU, when they talk so much about forming this coalition government and try to agree on what they would try to push during the first 100 years after the setting of the new government. And in that MOU, there was not the issue of Article 112. And already, it started sort of, we started to see complaint from the supporter of Move Forward Party and younger generation that why, Article 112 was not included in the MOU. I mean, we can understand, because, it would be too soon to, how to say, to shoot themselves, in the foot. And by not, trying to be so much provocative, but yet at the same time, there was a promise coming out of the of the executive, member of the Move Forward Party, that they would definitely want to discuss the issue of the reform of Article 112 in the parliament, even when the issue of Article 112 is not included in the MOU. Last point, they have to work very carefully. You know why? Because in the past few days, Thai people have become so obsessed with the issue of Nong Yok, a 15-year-old girl, who sort of rebel against everything, the rule, school rule, dye her hair, wearing, private uniform, private costume to go to school. And it has become such much debate, I mean, even among the pro-democracy forces, a lot of them disagree with, with her action, right? And Move Forward Party has been criticized for remaining so quiet about this issue, even though this party has supported the abolition of school uniform and, a certain kind of haircut. So, I mean, this sort of a reflection of whether Move Forward Party would be ready to get into heated issue like that at the time that they are so desperate to set up the government. So in other words, I mean, they have to be careful, especially during this critical time before the government is formed.
Thanks, Pavin. Now, I've sort of a broad question for the panel. It strikes me that after years of attempts by the conservative establishment to undermine parties aligned with former PM Thaksin, the result of that has merely been the emergence of a party not only calling for a moderate redistribution of wealth, as the Thaksinite parties have tended to do, but calling for fundamental structural reforms to load-bearing institutions of the royalist state. And I'm sort of wondering what the three of you think about where this is all heading. I mean, if the constant repression of the opposition has merely pushed young people toward a more radical critique of the existing institutions, where does this all end up? Is Thailand on the path to some sort of violent crisis? Or I'm curious. Perhaps Aim, you could give some thoughts, and then we could move to the other panelists.
You repeat the question again, Sebastian?
Well, there's been a dynamic where the establishment has consistently blocked Thaksin-aligned parties from governing effectively, including the coups, of course, of 2006 and 2014. And it seems like the logical result of that has been the emergence of the Move Forward Party and the Future Forward Party before it, that are calling for much more fundamental reforms, structural reforms to the Thai establishment, the political establishment. And I just wonder where you think this is going if, as Greg suggests, the conservative forces block the MFP from heading the next government, or if it does form the next government, hamstringing it in other ways or obstructing it in other ways, like where, what effect do you think that might have in the longer term?
There are a number of options for political conservative elites to undermine support for the reformist change, and this includes, Move Forward supporters and others. And I think the most obvious one, every option has its cost, right? And given the election result where MFP won big, and MFP and Pheu Thai together won really big, the cost of any kind of very overt counter move, for example, potentially, not allowing Pita to be in politics for some years, will come with a higher cost than, I believe, what Future Forward faced in 2019, 2020. So but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't go through with it. But I think, there's that option of very overt one. There's another option of, more less, more covert, like mobilizing their own support base, both online, offline, to oppose or, to muddy the water, basically, for any kind of reformist voices. There's the issue of information operations, which are ongoing. There's so many different avenues in which alternative voices, right? Anti-reformist voices could become pivotal. And I think knowing that that's where Thailand's heading, regardless of the election result, is important, because you're prepping your country for a lot of roadblocks ahead, that any kind of change will come with resistance, no matter what that change looks like, especially if it's big change. And so for me, as a Thai person as well, I think fantasizing about the victory of Move Forward and hoping that all these promises of change will occur is delusional. Like, these changes are extremely hard, especially the structural ones, to push through. People are going to be held them accountable. Now, the people who support the other side would obviously want to come out and antagonize supporters of. This is normal politics. So I think we should expect to see a variety of ways in which political conservative elites will make it hard for Move Forward Party to enact change. But if I were to think about the most important tool the political conservative players could use to undermine support, it would be mobilizing their own supporters, both online and offline, to discredit and weaken the support base of Move Forward Party, because that's tackling the grassroots support of the party at the public level, at the grassroots level. And I think that's probably the most frightening than let's just ban Pita, because that's just cutting off the head, right? But the support is still there. But if we see attempts like using information ops, using disinformation campaigns, using, just mobilizing their own support base to counteract the reformist support base, that I think is the most frightening, because that's demonstrating to the people that, there are people who support us too. There's at least 20% of voters who voted for parties that would be considered political conservative parties. That's a lot of millions of people. That's not just, 5 people. So mobilizing that against the current grassroots support base of the more reformist party, and to see that acting out online, offline, that sends a really strong signal that the battle is not over.
Thanks, Aim. Yeah, go on, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask the question, would the conservative forces be prepared to block the will of the people and put Thailand in a situation where it's probably going to have some kind of global backlash in terms of the European or American responses, put Thailand on a path to slower growth, once again being a backwater, being somewhat of a pariah state? Would they do that instead of accepting, a new Thailand in which their roles were smaller, but Thailand had more optimism? Yes, they would. They would do that. Why is that? Because they're prepared for the pie to not grow as fast or to remain small as long as they're dominant players within it. I think, if we think of Thailand as one of, 5 authoritarian states with different mechanisms of maintaining authoritarian rule, sure, Thailand is not Cambodia. It doesn't have the party structures that the Cambodian People's Party has, but it does have other patron-client mechanisms. I mean, there's a whole cluster of patron-client relationships based around the monarchy. This is the so-called network monarchy, many of which have done very well out of maintaining monarchical and military rule. The number of monopolies that exist in Thailand is very impressive, really. And Pita sort of put his hand on it recently when he said, there's 4,000 alcohol producers in Japan for the size of that market. For the same size market in Thailand, there's 4 or 5. And some of these Sino-Thai companies are very happy with the status quo, and so they have a vested interest in preserving it. I think the other thing is what we've seen since 2014 is that the Prayut regime has extended the Internal Security Operations Command across the country. It's been using provincial government mechanisms in the Ministry of the Interior to extend right across the country, and some of the work that Pongtong Pawakapan has done has shown that these groups get out into the community and can be forces to try and mobilise conservative opposition against progressive minded people. So, the junta has become more practiced in these forms of everyday repression, I think, since 2014. And they, I don't think, will necessarily hesitate to resort to those. They will try and use the path of least resistance. And I totally agree with Aim that the amount of resistance, the cost of overriding a legitimately elected government is going to be higher, but I'm still not convinced that they wouldn't accept those costs. And as you point out very astutely, Sebastian, that in trying to slay one dragon, they've created a stronger one. But at the same time, I think they've become almost more shameless about trying to preserve authoritarian rule in Thailand. And if you look at the way in which they're defending currently their relationship with the Myanmar junta, they're quite prepared even to defy ASEAN opinion. And ASEAN's not exactly an advocate for democracy. Will they be prepared to, have a Thailand which is simply one of the 5 authoritarian regimes in the Mekong region with China as a benefactor? Unfortunately, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities at all.
Pavin, do you have anything to add to that?
So I'll be brief, and I would rather talk about the response from the current generation. Should the old regime, trying to block, Pita, or trying to prevent, the political shift. We have to ask ourselves, can we really imagine, the Thai monarchy being under the constitution? Can we really imagine that? I can't for one. I mean, for myself, from 1932, there was only a brief period that we can really talk about, constitutional monarchy, right? But for a long time, for so many decades, Thai monarchy has behaved so badly, had behaved so unconstitutionally. So because of that, I do not foresee that there would be a big change, especially the change that would respond to the need of the current generation. And as I emphasized in my talk earlier, that up to this point there has been no sign from the royal institution, or even institution that support the monarchy, that has wanted to sort of create a kind of dialogue with the generation of how we can come to a conclusion, what kind of compromise, what kind of power concession that they would want to offer, so that the Thai society can move forward from this point. Should this happen in other countries like in the UK, I would not imagine that the monarchy would remain silent, in the face of protest from the public. So because of all this sign, basically no sign. So I think the ball would be in the court of the royalists. The ball would be in the court of the elite, whether how they want to proceed from this point. I think because of their resistance to change, I'm afraid that the one of the options would be that Thailand could end up in violence, something that we not want to see, but it could likely happen in the future. The winning of the Move Forward Party could be a solution to all this. We are talking about moving Forward Party coming to play a role that would try to negotiate the change, and if they allow Move Forward Party to do the job, through the parliament, at least this would go according to the political system, political process, and we could end up having a sort of smooth transition into a kind of reform of the royal institution. But again, I don't think that would be the case, especially when we talk so much about them trying to block the Move Forward Party from being able to function, even at this point before the government is formed. So the future will look bleak for Thailand. Lastly, we have to talk about regional climate as well. The trend of illiberalism has swept across Southeast Asia. You have seen authoritarian regimes everywhere. Myanmar, Cambodia. Going down south, you see Brunei and Singapore. Thailand live among these authoritarian states, and then these regimes sort of keep one another support and also legitimacy that they could do certain things, that they do not have to care so much about not only their own people, but also regional audience. So I don't think that is useful for also the future of Thailand.
Thanks, Pavin. That actually transitions fairly well into one of the questions from our audience. Justin Gubler asks, how does the PRC factor into this election? The PRC has influence with both the military junta and with Sino-Thai business elites who are interested in obviously trade and investment from China. Greg, you spoke a little bit about the role that China might play in terms of reinforcing an authoritarian tendency. Can you expand on that at all? Like, how does Beijing view this election and the possible outcomes, and how might that impact the course of Thai politics going forward? And indeed, if the MFP does come into power, how it is able to govern?
Yeah, I think we should be clear that both sides of politics would always seek to preserve Thai sovereignty. But I think one of the tensions that we've seen with the Conservatives is that they were pushed, in a sense, towards closer relations with China after the 2014 coup, because the US started to cut down on military support, military assistance, and brought in a range of other measures. There were the steps to brand Thailand's, look at Thailand's performance on trafficking in persons and so on. The US is very powerful, but China does offer, of course, a less conditional partner, and that was attractive after the 2014 coup. And I think you saw many conservative commentators say, well, we always have the China option. And Prayut, of course, it's well known that he passed Xi Jinping's book on Chinese governance around his cabinet, and that model, I guess, of a quiet politics in which there is not the noise of democracy is something which is from periodically been appealing to some of the Thai conservative elites. They don't want the criticism of the West, the demands for democracy, and China, of course, doesn't ask for that. I mean, China itself wants its interests preserved regardless of who is in government, and doesn't particularly care about the brand, the color of the regime. They will work with the Thaksin regime, they will work with the Prayut regime, they would work with a Pita regime, but they would probably be a little bit more comfortable without Pita, because he's likely to take human rights and democracy a little bit more seriously. One thing that we've seen in this strange hiatus period is one businessman and a Thai business council start to talk about how they believe that this is not good for Thailand's economy to have this uncertainty, that Chinese investors are getting nervous about this period of uncertainty. And that's a sort of subtle way of saying, well, Thailand would be better served by stability, and stability might look like the continuance of some kind of, junta-related party. I think there's many dimensions to the Thai-China relationship, and I think we should also be aware that a lot of it occurs outside of formal diplomatic channels through the Thai investment, the Chinese investment into Thailand, which was a very interesting phenomenon that was happening prior to the election, with a lot of so-called grey capital, Tun Si Tao, being found out, and many officials in Thailand being found to be in the pay of Chinese mafia triad groups that had been allowed to buy property, buy Thai identities, and this is something which hasn't become an electoral issue, but the fact that it doesn't get a lot of coverage sort of shows you that I think that China is working on more than one track in terms of trying to bring about a Thailand that's more amenable to its interests. So I'll just leave it there.
Aim, do you have anything to add on the China angle to this current political situation?
That's a little bit that I've mentioned this earlier about the influence of China also in the information arena. And this, I think, is really subtle, but over time becomes obvious in the sense that China, through, not as the government, but through its private and semi-private media companies, have been buying local Thai media companies for the past 10-15 years. And that has changed the narratives about China and life in China for Thai media consumers. And I think that's something interesting to keep watch, and especially with the rise of TikTok and other media platforms that are Chinese owned, whether or not that would actually over time alter the perception of Thai people about China generally. But it has already shown that the Chinese media companies have actually altered the way one conduct business in Thailand. And one particular example I want to give is regarding, so I've interviewed a lawyer of a online shopping platform, a popular online shopping platform. I won't name the name, but many Thais would know that is Chinese owned. And she has told me that whenever she gets a phone call from police or other government agencies requesting personal data, that the company's rule is to not ask questions and turn over the data. And that's a very different way of doing business than what some of the Western media companies or tech platforms have done. And I think that comes with, just being a China company, and this is how it's done there. And so they don't want to have troubles with government. And I think that slowly over time, that would create a new norm that would give the state even more power to request personal data about consumers or citizens relating to their online activities because of how Chinese companies have changed the way they conduct business vis-a-vis the state. And I think that's something that often goes under the radar. People don't think about it. And I think over time will, ultimately change both Thai people's perception of what China is and what China does, but also just us actually conducting business on a day-to-day basis about what kind of privacy are we willing to give. So that's something I think we should watch for.
Thanks. Now we've got one more question here that's quite interesting, and I might kick this one to Pavin because I know you have to go shortly, Pavin. Phil Calvert asks, what role Thailand's economy might play in the political dynamics of the current situation? Greg mentioned before that, a conservative obstruction of the MFP victory could result in, stagnation, economic stagnation. So Pavin, I wonder if you have any thoughts about, the bread and butter issues that do underpin a lot of, and have historically underpinned a lot of the public discontent with the ruling establishment in Thailand. What role could this play in the immediate future?
Well, I might not be the best person to answer this question because I'm not economist. I would rather respond to the previous question on China. But anyway,
no, feel free to address the China question if you'd like.
I think, bread and butter issue has never been key message for the Move Forward Party. As we already discussed this, that the focus of the Move Forward Party has been the structural change, and I don't think Thai people have expected so much that that the Move Forward Party will come to fix a kind of economy. I might answer this very naively, whether whether Thailand is suffering from any kind of economic recession right now, and whether it's just, my point is that the fact that a lot of people elected Move Forward Party rather than Pheu Thai Party, it seems to show that they care more on structural change rather than the issue of the daily economic concern. That what I'm trying to say, and maybe that would give some way leeway for the government, for the new government to pay more attention on what they're supposed to do in terms of reforms of key institutions before any kind of economic issue. Okay, but just before I go, just to respond to the issue of China, I find it quite interesting because I don't think that there would be. Okay, I think the new government would focus more or less on the issue of human rights, that's for sure. And especially Pita already talked about how he wanted to see democracy return, in Myanmar, right? But again, I'm not sure whether we can really talk about drastic change in terms of foreign policy, especially when it comes to Thai relation with big power, and in this case, the United States and China. Obviously, there would be an improvement of the Thai-U.S. relations. After all, the two countries have had a kind of, military, and this is a kind of military alliance that, Thailand can never walk away from the United States. And in the past few years, if not more, this kind of relationship has been very, very cold. Yeah. Also simply because the U.S. continue to intervene in Thai domestic politics, something that the Thai elite, did not really like it. But again, with Pita being prime minister and leading the new government, whether this could be a U-turn when it comes to Thai-Chinese relation for the sake of the improvement of Thai-US relation. Again, I don't see that would be the case. We have to ask ourselves, Thailand, we have to ask itself whether Thailand could afford, to walk away from, this relationship with China. I mean, the answer is, impossible, because of the importance of China, in all fronts, political, economic, social, cultural, the geographic proximity between the two countries. And I think, from the viewpoint of China, does it matter Pita being in power? I don't think it matters that much. China has emphasized over and over with, the Thai elite that China is here to make money, not to make enemies. And also, China has proven to be able to work with also democratic regime of Thailand. Relationship between Thaksin and China has been very close. Okay, some might argue that Thaksin is very different from Pita, but whether Pita, would be willing to stand up and condemn human rights abuses, in China, with the possibility of such kind of statement would affect, overall bilateral relationship between Thailand and China. That would, I think, for me, would be a bit insane. So, in other words, I would think that a business between the two countries would continue. That's all, between Thailand and China.
Thanks, Pavin. I know you have to go now, so feel free to log off. And thank you for taking part. It's been great. There is one more question about the potential reaction of the US and Western governments to whatever happens to unfold in the coming months. So Greg and Aim, if you're interested in just sticking around for a few more minutes to address that. Yes, Phil Calvert asks, what would be the most constructive actions that Western governments could take at this juncture, given the influence of China and the conservative, I've seen some conservative conspiracy theories circulating on social media to the effect that the US is behind the MFP and is, this sort of color revolution narrative is coming into conservative discourse in Thailand. I wondered if you could both address that before we wind up.
It's a diabolical problem for Western governments. If we think about the Australian government's very interested in preserving its interests, and it's been quite careful to emphasise its respect for the monarchy, to say rather little about the military, and to, I guess, gently express the opinion that it wants Thailand to observe democracy and human rights. But what we've seen is that Australia's been quite pragmatic in relation to its responses to coups. So while I have no doubt that the relationship between Australia and Thailand, for example, would strengthen, would become closer, there would be more likely to be high-level visits. We don't have many Australian prime ministers visiting Thailand. There is a barrier when you have a former dictator in power. I don't think that's something which is very appealing. But on the other hand, Australia has been fairly good at working with a Thailand that continues to either be under a junta or under a junta proxy party. So the problem for Western governments is that if they take a strong stand, it does lead to accusations that they're interfering in internal matters, and that's something very difficult to rebut at times. And I think the Americans found that out really to their detriment in the post-coup of 2014 environment, when they, if they made a stand, it only let loose more conspiracy theories about what the United States wanted. And unfortunately, I think some of those conspiracy theories are really being hypercharged by some of the information operations that go on in Thailand. Tony Cartalucci was turned out to be a Russian operative and someone who very good at sort of fostering those conspiracy theories about, what's the US doing? Is it trying to turn Thailand into base nuclear weapons against China? Is the new consulate in Chiang Mai a big spy station to help Thailand become a base for spying on China? And this is not really very helpful for the United States either. So it's going to be difficult, particularly if there's not a coup, and particularly if there's a kind of semi-judicial process or a semi-legitimate process to remove Pita. And I think having that cloudiness also makes it more difficult for the Western governments to take a strong stand on the direction that Thailand takes.
Thanks, Greg. Aim, do you have anything to add to that, to wind things up for us? Or any final thoughts?
Sure. I mean, the information warfare will continue in terms of, different groups in society will weaponize some kind of information to discredit the other part, right? I had a conversation with a staff at the U.S. Embassy a few years ago who were really concerned that there are groups in Thailand that come up with some kind of conspiracy theories that somehow U.S. is plotting to overthrow the Thai government, and they wanted to know who these people are, right? And I think from the U.S. perspective, there's that issue that they can deal with within, just for themselves, is figuring out where the narratives about the U.S. Funding MFP or other groups to win the election may be coming from, and either try to manage that narratives or just at least be aware of where the source of the narratives. But I think in terms of, what can they do externally, just like Greg said, support the election result, accept the election result, and continue as they have done, which is, Thailand is an important ally in Asia Pacific for the US. And this should be the same for other Western governments like Canada, like Australia. And so I think what we should be looking forward to, looking at the relationship of Thailand and other Western partners, or even regional partner, is a Thailand that has just come out of a really clean and well-conducted election, something that Thailand has not had in a long time, right? And I think that's important, that we just had an election that was clean, that well-contested, well-conducted, and the results should be respected. And that is so important in a region like Southeast Asia, where there aren't many good elections. And by good, I mean free, fair, well-conducted elections. There just aren't. And the fact that Thailand was able to achieve that in an environment of a competitive authoritarian regime is important. And the key simple message that we should take away from this election is that was a well-done election that was free and fair, and therefore the results should be respected going forward. And that's already a good example. Even if the country has not got, a government yet, and that the result may or may not indicate who might govern, that we were able to get a good election going is important. And it demonstrates that you can have this work in a country that has been marred by very flawed elections recently. And I think that sets a good example for the region that is looking for more democracy in general, and it should send a good signal to its partners, both in the region and elsewhere, that Thailand's looking up, and already it has made good progress.
Fantastic. Well, that seems like an optimistic note to end on. So please join me in thanking our panelists, Greg and Aim, for their insights. And thank you for tuning in. A video of this event will be posted to our social media channels and our website, thediplomat.com, in the coming days. And so, feel free to share it widely. And stay tuned to our website for the latest and most comprehensive coverage of the Asia Pacific. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Sebastian.